good friend of mine walked out of the theater after seeing Transformers 1 last year. He sent me a text with zero preamble and just said Megatron was right. That about sums up the flavor of discourse around Bryan Tyree Henry's take on the bad guy. From his origins as D16 the Miner to the leader of a revolution, he felt like the movie's real main character. Usually when a modern genre film, like Marvel movies, gives their supposed bad guy understandable motivations, they make sure they do something horrible, like shoot hostages, just to make it clear that they're still the bad guys. In Megatron's case, honestly, the film doesn't seem to protest much when he takes more extreme measures toward the finale, and it feels like it sort of agrees with him. Whether you agree or disagree, he's certainly a compelling character, which made me immediately pre-order his Studio Series figure. One of only 2 Transformer 1 releases in the line so far, along with an Optimus Prime for him to fight. The Optimus, which was reviewed right here on childrenofprimus.com, had his bright spots, but was a little underwhelming in places, so let's hope that the bad guy comes out on top. So there's 2 things you might notice about this guy right out of the box. The first thing is that Megatron has legs for days.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
Seriously, I think they're longer than his torso. But honestly, after studying the tape, this is how he actually looked in the animation. Remember, this figure's specifically based on D16's final Megatron form from the last few minutes of the movie, after equipping himself with the Megatronus cog. The second thing you might notice is that he's got the wrong fusion cannon. Megatron's big final upgrade gave him a thick 3-barreled cannon, which the cinematography even emphasized. Though instead, this figure's rocking the second form, more G1 style cannon that one popped out of his arm when he was fighting Starscream. I'll blame this on one of the usual problems of toys needing to be ready for production years before a movie's out, and often not having access to finalized designs. Considering how accurate the rest of them is, it's impressive this is the only thing they got wrong. Because yes, the rest of them is nicely accurate as a recognizably G1 style Megatron, though a filter of Cybertronian greebling look more like his classic design than even Optimus does. One thing he does share with Optimus though is his height, towering over most other Deluxes, though he doesn't give the same impression of hugeness thanks to how lanky he is. His colors, meanwhile, feel like they should come across as bland, but somehow manage to work. See, they didn't give him the movie's shiny silver deco, opting for a flat gray on most of his body with black on his extremities and accents of red and yellow. There is a bit of silver paint on his face, backpack, and the little weapon on his left arm, but mostly it's gray, and yet somehow it works. I think they just picked out a good shade of gray, one that isn't too dull or too flat and picks out his details just right. One thing that he reflexively needs is missing though, a Decepticon symbol right smack dab in the convenient flat panel in the middle of his chest, but it's blank. Though again, that's film accurate, since his last upgrade made Sentinel's carved-in version vanish, and he doesn't get a new one until the post-credits. I think I'll just find a random Toy Hacks one and stick it there once this review's done. Megatron's build quality is, frankly, extremely impressive, especially after how hit or miss it was on Optimus. First off, despite his skinny proportions, he's got a bit more mass and density than you'd expect. Though more importantly, all of his joints are nice and tight. And he's got a general feeling of sturdy solidity to him that's hard to define. One interesting thing about how he's built is his knee joints, which lock into a straight position with a click and need to be unclipped to be posed. Speaking of posability, that's another area that's way better than I expected. The advantage of those long legs is that he can really move, and he's got all the swivels and tilts you need to get a bit silly with it. The rest of him has also got all the expected joints, including wrist swivels. And I think it's the fact that he's so lanky and noodly that makes him feel extra bendy. I think the only thing I wish he had was a head that could look up or down like Optimus. When it comes to accessories and features, he's also got way more going on than I expected. That fusion can on his right arm pops off of a 5mm peg. Meanwhile, the smaller gun on his left arm can pop off on its own bespoke peg, and then you can combine it with the cannon to make a much bigger boomstick.
This is my boomstick!
Meanwhile, he's got two thin lasers pegged into the sides of his backpack, which you can pop off and turn into pistols or mount on his forearms instead of his cannons, leaving a couple of 5mm pegs on the backpack. In fact, the backpack itself can also pop off of a 5mm peg, giving you even more flexibility. And that's what he feels like, flexible. There's a ton you can do with the accessories he's got, and that's before mixing in other 5mm compatible things. This is something rare for a Studio Series figure, and makes him feel more mainline legacy figure in a good way. This is one of those transformations that's a bit more complicated than you expect, but not in a bad way. It's the way Megatron's long legs go through several rounds of rotations and flips that usually trips me up, along with the way his torso changes shape and tabs back into them. Still, it mostly all works, and mostly all makes sense, with the one exception being the way that the gray covers on the backside of his legs sometimes don't like to properly plug into their alt mode positions, unless you fiddle with them just a little bit. There's also a curious choice with his robot head. They have you rotate it and then fold it into his torso, in a way that leaves his face extremely visible in his vehicle mode, when there's nothing stopping you from just rotating it, so it gets hidden a little better, which is how I've done it in all of these photos. Man, this weird looking tank mode. However, it does clear a bar that a lot of Cybertronian tanks don't. It actually does look like a tank and not a pile of just random stuff with a turret on top. Even in the middle of the tank is a blatantly rearranged robot torso with a tucked away robot head. Still, it's a strange shape, and with a tiny body near the back, a pair of long treads made from the legs, as you can see, and an equally long gun barrel coming up from a very tiny turret. Still, I don't think it's a bad kind of weird. It looks kind of science fiction tank from strategy video game or something. It's got a lot of personality. His colors are mostly the same, but centering the gun turret and the barrel makes the metallic silver paint stand out more, giving him a slightly different vibe. Meanwhile, his build quality is a bit dodgier in this mode, and mostly comes down to that turret, made out of his backpack, fusion cannon, and forearm gun. See, it's mounted on a 5mm port on a joint which you can use to raise, lower, and rotate. But using a removable part as a load-bearing part of it makes the turrets liable to pop off just a little too easy. You can pop it back on, but still have to handle with caution that rotating turret's his main feature in this mode, since there aren't any wheels or anything on his treads. Meanwhile, those other two thin lasers are meant to mount on ports outside of his treads, but you can also mount them on either side of the turret, or even take the turret off, on purpose this time, and mount something else there. Like his robot mode, there's a lot of flexibility here when it comes to accessory use. I'm surprised how much I like this figure. For something that, on paper, seems like it ought to be a bit dull, he's miles ahead of his Optimus counterpart, and that wasn't even a bad figure. He's really solidly built, pop-off tank and barrel aside, feels good in your hands, and is more articulated than you expect, and is surprisingly customizable with his big loadout of accessories. Wrong cannon aside, he's a great representation of the interesting, complex character from the film, and beyond that, he's got a good, all-purpose, deluxe Cybertron mode Megatron. If you have an Optimus form to fight, like I do, great, but even if you don't, I think this guy's worth getting on his own merits.